Thanks to the TVS for inviting me to speak here. It's an honor. I'm very proud to speak about the international guidelines. And I am the speaker. Although I am the speaker, there are a lot of people involved in this project, and I'm presenting on behalf of the International Guideline Development Group. We started on this part of the journey in 2009. And this journey has been preceded by a journey from 2005 to 2009, in which, together with our colleagues from the National Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel from the US, the European Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel developed an international guideline, or actually two guidelines, one for prevention and one for treatment of pressure ulcers. And Professor Carol Deely was the chair before me of the EPUAP group who led on that. And she told me what a huge job it was, and I thought, okay, I think I'm up to it, but now that I'm working on it, it's really, it's major. But it's also very nice to work with an international group. So in 2009, we launched the first pressure ulcer prevention and treatment guidelines for pressure ulcers, the international guidelines. And immediately we decided that it would be necessary to do an update. And that would be the update for 2014. But during the process of developing the first international guidelines, several colleagues from other countries came to us and said, we would like to participate too. Well, by then we had been too far into the development of the 2009 guideline, but we told them that we would ask them if they would be interested in the 2014. And the Pan-Pacific Pressure Injury Alliance said that they would be happy to participate with us in the new guideline. And the Pan-Pacific Pressure Injury Alliance had just launched their own clinical practice guideline, and they are not going to update that one, but they're going to use this international one as the new guideline for the Pan-Pacific. And that's the Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And the Japanese Society of Pressure Ulcers, they were in the middle of developing their own guideline, and they said, well, we won't be joining you this time, but we would love to send an observer to your meetings so that we might join in the next guideline update, of which I don't even want to start thinking. But so the new International Guideline Development Group is made up of the National Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel with Dr. Diane Langemo as chair, the Pan-Pacific Pressure Injury Alliance with Professor Carolyn Carville as chair, and the EPUAP, of which I am the chair. And Takafumi Kadono, who is a Japanese dermatologist, is the observer from the Japanese Society of Pressure Ulcers. So what we did in this 2014 guideline is we expanded the number of countries involved. And what we also decided is that, as a consequence, the recommendations will be applicable to more parts of the world. And more countries will adopt and use the guideline. And that's really a great step forward of the 2009 guideline, because that was only Europe and only the US and North America, and Europe, sorry. The purpose and the scope of our guideline is to develop a 2014 version, and I was told not to talk about an update, because it really is a new guideline. So a 2014 version of the international guidelines of the prevention and treatment of pressure ulcers. And the guideline will target consumers, carers, all healthcare settings. It refers to individuals of all ages and all health professionals. And it will be in a new format. It will be one document for treatment and prevention, whereas we had two separate documents the last time. And there are some new topics. Of course, there are some of the topics were there before, so the new topics are in red. So we have three background sections now in this guideline. The last one, we only had the etiology section. Now we also have international trends in prevalence and incidence of pressure ulcers. And we have a section on how pressure ulcers heal, implications for wound bed and peri-wound care. as kind of a background to inform clinicians and patients on how it works and how big the problem is. Assessment has the same chapters as before: risk factors and assessment, skin and tissue assessment, classification of pressure ulcers, and pressure ulcer assessment and monitoring of pressure ulcer healing. Prevention has emerging therapies for prevention as a new chapter, and we will look at microclimate manipulation, preventative dressings, electrical stimulation, ultrasound and topical agents in that chapter, and the evidence that's out there now. And then there are some chapters that have been combined. In the last guidelines, we had a chapter on nutrition in the prevention one and a chapter on nutrition in the treatment guideline, and now we've combined them. So prevention and treatment will be about nutrition, support services, and repositioning and mobilization. Then these are the chapters for the treatment part of the guideline. And I'm not going to read them all, but the new part is that we added biofilms to assessment and treatment of infection. So we added recommendations on biofilms. And we have some chapters on unique needs of special populations. And individuals in the operating room and individuals requesting palliative care were already, the evidence on that was already there in the 2009 guideline, but we now added spinal cord injured individuals, infants and children, individuals in critical care settings, bariatric individuals, and older adults as specific sections. And we also address implementation. And a major part of the implementation topic is patient consumers and their caregivers. Because we are developing an international guideline, and of course, when you develop a guideline, we discussed in a great length how to involve patient consumers and their caregivers in the development of this guideline. But that is a difficult challenge in an international group, because although patients from the Pan-Pacific and the US and the UK could understand each other and could maybe look at the same papers, patients from the Netherlands don't read English that well. Patients from Poland, for example, don't read English. So it is a challenge to involve our European patients in guideline development. So that's why we decided that that would not be feasible during the development of this guideline. What we did do is we wrote a chapter for patient consumers and their caregivers. We will also we wrote the chapter in lay language, and we will invite all the countries who are going to use the guideline to involve patients as soon as they translate the guideline to their own language and to their own situation. We also pay attention to implementation strategies, particularly barriers and facilitators to implementation of this guideline, professional health education. We have quality indicators in the guideline, and a chapter on areas for future research. So a short overview of our methodology. First, we had to identify the evidence, of course. So we looked at several databases and we developed a search strategy, and the next slide will show you more about that. We evaluated the evidence, so we put the evidence in evidence tables. We looked at the quality of the evidence and at the level of evidence. And then we drafted recommendations, or we adapted the ones from the 2009 if there was new evidence available. We rated the strength of evidence into level 1, 2, and 3. We summarized the supporting evidence, and we sent our chapters out for peer review, and I'll get back to that later too. Peer review is done by the Guideline Development Group, by the stakeholders, and by EPUAP, NPUAP, and Pan-Pacific boards. And we are now at the process of assigning strength of recommendation using grade. So our literature search runs from January 1st, 2008 to July 1st, 2013. We added an extra half a year because we were late. We had planned to have this guideline finished earlier, and we felt it wasn't fair to include the latest evidence, so we extended our our literature search to July 2013 instead of December 2012. We peer-reviewed the articles, and the search strategy was developed with a reference librarian at the UNMC Medical Library in Nebraska, USA. And it was designed to provide a high sensitivity to emerging research and practice. We critically appraised over 1,000 new papers and included over 300 of them in the update. And the search strategy can be found at this website, internationalguideline.com, where you can also register as a stakeholder if you haven't done so already. I would really like to invite you to do that. There's a lot of information on how the guideline is being developed on this website. And we have 27 small working groups. And small working groups doesn't account for the large amount of work that these groups are doing. They are critically appraising the evidence. They are making evidence tables, and they are writing draft recommendations. And that's a huge amount of work. Approximately 125 experts from all over the world were involved in this process. And we had web-based meetings, because it's actually impossible to fly all over the world to work together. And it's also very difficult to find a time slot in which everyone is awake. So a lot of the time, the people in New Zealand it was 12 o'clock at night there, so they were in their bed in their pajamas, cameras turned off of the web-based meeting. And the people in the US were just getting up. And we in Europe were quite okay, because it was in the mid of the day. But it was really, it's really fun to get to know each other in that way. But the meetings were web-based, and Emily Hessler is our methodologist. And Emily really is worth her weight in gold. She is really the one who is chasing up the groups, helping the small working groups write their recommendations, write their evidence tables, and also chasing the guideline development group to double-check the evidence tables, because we're double-checking 10% of the guideline, of the evidence tables. And she's really the one who is running the project on a day-to-day basis. Then we also invited stakeholders, and the invitations were sent to over 600 interested parties, and 329 registered as stakeholder. Now, you can register as a private person, or you can register as someone who works with a company. And if you haven't done so, I would again like to invite you, because there are still some chapters up for stakeholder review. We had, for the chapters that were up there already, we have had over 1,350 views of the chapter, and we had approximately 160 comments made on the chapters. The Guideline Development Group has looked at the comments, has adapted the recommendations and the text where necessary, and these are the chapters that have now been completed, which is about 70% of the guideline. So, biological dressings, biophysical agents, patient consumers and their caregivers, wound dressings, emerging therapies, etiology, infection and biofilms, growth factors. Well, I'm going to stop reading them, you can read them for yourself, but these are the ones that are finished, so ready for printing. There are a few chapters up at the moment, up on the website, which is the chapter on critical care patients, device-related pressure ulcers, pediatrics, prevalence, strategies, so the facilitator and barriers, health professional education, surgery, and their chapter on bariatric patients. So if you feel that you can add anything to the recommendations or the text that is in these chapters, please sign up as a stakeholder and have a look and tell us what you think and if you have any improvements to make. And to come in April 2014 is older adults assessment classification, quality indicator, spinal cord injury, risk, and topical skin care. At the moment, for the chapters that are ready or ready for printing, we are adding the strength of recommendation using the grade methodology. The guideline development groups and the small working group members are doing that. And the guideline is expected to be ready for printing by June 2014. Now, I told some people yesterday I wouldn't be giving a date. This is our expected date. I'm not sure if we're going to make it. The small working groups are getting tired, so it's more and more difficult to keep people up to speed or working on the guidelines. So I hope we will be ready for printing in June. We should be ready, have it printed in September, by the end of August in Stockholm, where the EPUAP conference will be held. And we want to launch there. So we invite companies and wound care organizations to sponsor printing and dissemination. These guidelines were developed without any sponsoring of companies and wound care organizations, because we wanted to have them independent, and that was even more important for the Australian and New Zealand group, because if there are companies involved during the development of the guidelines won't be accepted by the Australian and New Zealand government as leading guidelines. So we had to be very strict on that. So if you would like to sponsor us, please contact either Diane Langemo, Carolyn Carville, or myself. It's my email address up here, and gdgchairs@internationalguideline.com will send an email to all three of us. And I'm happy to say that the end is near for this guideline round, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Is there any questions for Lisette? Liz?
This is really exciting, and I can't wait for the results of this, and thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious, you alluded to the fact that there's no sponsorship for the development of the guideline, which is I totally agree with that. The people who, you mentioned a few people, methodologists, I presume they have been paid to do the work, but the working groups, is that?
All volunteers.
Yes,
yes.
I thought they might be.
And we are very thankful
yes.
to them. Yeah.
And I think that's really commendable. I mean, that shows the passion and motivation across the world for getting things right in pressure ulcer prevention, doesn't it? If all those people have volunteered their time, and it must have been an awful large amount of time.
It has been. We haven't made it. We should make a calculation of how much time goes into development of it. I think we could.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Lisette? Okay.
I'm very curious how it will compare to the NICE guideline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carol.
What formats will the guideline be produced as?
Thank you. We will produce a full guideline version with all the recommendations and the text. That will be one book. There will be quick reference guides with only the recommendations in it, and so they are thinner, and they will be downloadable for free from the EPUAP website. Only the quick reference guide. The full guideline will be for purchase, available for money, and we are also thinking about developing an app. But that is only if we find enough funding. But we would like to develop an app with the guidelines so that you can use it on your smartphone or your computer. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette.
Thank you. Thank you.